As a fish keeper, do you have the dream of having a dedicated space for your aquariums, like a basement, a garage, or a completely separate building on your property like I'm fortunate enough to have? Well, let me tell you something. I've had every type of fish room you can imagine, and they are great, but they're also not. And today, I'm going to give you a huge reason why. Now, this video is not about how to build a fish room. I have a very particular message that I want to share here. One of the downsides of having a dedicated aquarium space, and I have the most perfect story to share that's going to bring that point home. We need to put in some plutonium, dial in the date of 2017, and get the DeLorean up to 88 miles an hour to transport Lisa and I back 3 houses ago. We were renting a house in King George, Virginia that had a really nice unfinished basement that we moved all of our aquariums to once we unfortunately shut our shop down. I filmed probably 100 videos in that space. We had 225 gallon tanks, my very first 240 gallon, a bunch of smaller tanks, and it was fantastic. It was a dedicated space specifically to our aquariums, but it was kind of at a sad point in our life because, like I said, we had just shut our shop down, just lost the dream. Something you might not think about is when you close a business like that, a business that you had rent and utility bills and money owed to suppliers and even a balance owed to UPS, those bills don't just disappear when you close down. Oh no, all those places still wanted their money, including the owner of that building who said, hey, listen, y'all, I know you're having some problems right now, but you signed a 5-year lease. You still owe 2 years worth of rent. Add to that Lisa and I had gone through our entire savings, maxed out all of our credit cards, and even took out a loan from my mother. Hopefully you can understand why this was a particularly low point of our lives. I was in the very fortunate situation in that I had a business that I had before all of this craziness with KGTropicals started. And it was a business that I could just turn on and off whenever I wanted. So I was able to turn that back on, go back to work, and get things going again. But I knew that we had dug this hole so deep, it was going to take a while to get out of it. The reason why I bring all this up is I went from being able to monitor my aquariums all the time because I worked full time with KGTropicals to only being able to check on my aquariums and do what needed to be done when I got home from work. And I was putting in like 70 hours a week. The fact that all of our tanks were secluded in the basement away from the main living area that we were in all the time, believe it or not, made things worse. Yes, having a dedicated aquarium space is great, but it can also be a nightmare if there's problems. Think about it like this. Let's take my current situation. I have this beautiful building here, which is completely separate from my house. And this is something that I dreamt of my entire adult life, and it is great. But when am I going to see if a problem happens, if a tank springs a leak, or if one of my fish gets beat up and needs to be isolated, put into a hospital tank, or else it's going to die? That actually just happened to us. We had our 90-gallon tank spring a leak, and thankfully we did see it when there was about that much water left in it. If not, it would have been a tank full of dead fish. The point is, when am I going to know that these things are happening? I'm only going to know when I come out here. And if it just so happens to be a day where I don't get out here till 8 o'clock at night, it might be too late, just like it almost was with that 90-gallon. Water was everywhere. I know exactly what you're thinking right now because I used to think this too. Psh, if I had a building like that, I'd be out there all the time. Everybody would know where to find me because I'd always be there. And the fact is, you just wouldn't. Yeah, you'd be out there all the time in the beginning during that honeymoon period, but as time goes by, you'd start to find yourself out there less and less. And before you know it, you'd get to the point where you're only really out there when it's time to do maintenance. In my case, time to make videos, or it's time to feed the fish. I remember in the house that we lived in before we bought this one and moved to North Carolina, we had our tanks in our garage, and that garage also served as my office. So I was out there all the time because this is what I do for a living. So I'd be looking at my tanks. If I'm not working on my computer, I'd be looking in my tanks, and I would always be there. So if something went wrong, I was right there to take care of it. It was very convenient and very nice, but I'll be damned if not one day ever went by where I didn't think, geez, I wish I had my office separated from all of these tanks. I wish we had a dedicated space specifically for our aquariums. Why did I think that? I have no idea. Because now that I have that, I'm sitting every day thinking, geez, I wish I was surrounded by my tanks all the time. I wish I was connected to them like that again, instead of it feeling like such a chore. I don't know, it's just part of my daily routine. So with all that in mind, let's talk about the incident that sparked the idea for this video. Again, go back to 2017. I went back out on the road fixing people's furniture in their homes. That was the business that I had. It was a great business, but I was away from home 60 to 70 hours a week. I had some really long days sometimes, and I'd get home late in the evening, and the last thing I would want to do is mess with my aquariums. I would just want to get home and relax. And this is where the psychology of things comes into play. I know that doesn't make sense, but it will. What I'm trying to say is if I came home from even a really long day at work and my aquarium was sitting right next to my TV and I plop down in my recliner to relax and I see that something's going on in that tank, whether it's a dead fish or a filter failure or whatever it is that's wrong, I would be right there and I would have no choice but to relax. I'm not going to sit there and look at a tank that's stagnant water or the fish are gasping for air or something like that. No, I'm going to take care of it right now. Well, if the tanks are separated, like say behind closed doors down in a basement, I'm not going to see them. They're not going to be right there in my face. And so if something goes wrong, who knows when I'm going to find the problem? There's a particular day that stands out in my history of fish keeping that is this exact scenario playing out. It was a very long day at work. I didn't get home till like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. I did not want to do anything but just sit down and relax. But when I walked in the door, I immediately, did what I do. I went around and said hey to all the kids, gave Lisa a kiss, smacked her on the butt, and, did my normal daddy's home routine. But the whole time while I was doing that, I'm like, there was something. There was some kind of a smell. And it wasn't a smell like somebody just farted or there was something burning on the stove. It was a very distinct smell. And you know what that smell is. It wasn't like knock you in your face kind of a smell, but it was there. Every once in a while, I would get a little whiff of it. It was the smell of dead fish. We all know that smell. We all fear that smell. We all would rather have the smell of a burrito fart than to have that. Because if you smell that, you know what's going on. Now, I've been in this hobby for a very long time. So long, in fact, that I've become kind of desensitized to fish death. Yeah, some of them, like if one of these was to perish or something like that, it's absolutely devastating. But we have so many fish, and we've always had so many fish that you kind of get used to finding one that has passed every once in a while, and it becomes not so much of a big deal. I know how barbaric that sounds, but it just becomes something that you're kind of used to. But when it happens, it's not something that can be ignored. You still have to look around and say, hey, what's going on? Why did that happen? So when I had this hint of a dead fish smell in my house, I knew something was wrong. I had a few African cichlid tanks in my basement, and if one fish dies in an African cichlid tank, it can actually start a chain reaction that can become a real big problem if you don't do something about it. So I knew just from that little hint of a smell, we got something going on here. Whether I want to do it or not, I have to see what's going on. I opened up the door to the basement, and that faint smell was no longer a faint smell. It felt like I got smacked in the face with it. It was absolutely intense coming from the basement. And as I went down the stairs, it got way, way, way worse. As I got to the bottom of the stairs and rounded the corner, I was able to see some of the tanks. The very first tank that I checked was a tank that I had a big albino tiger Oscar in it, like this one. And he was really old, and it would not have surprised me if he had passed. But no, he was in there. He was fine. Lisa's discus were fine. I had a small saltwater tank that was fine, even though I'm terrible at keeping saltwater fish. We had a goldfish tank. All of those fish were fine. Everything was checking out. But my basement was like a horseshoe shape, and I was only on one side. Around the other side was a 150-gallon aquarium full of full-grown peacocks, haps, and mbunas. And I said, uh-oh, what about that one? I walked around that corner and I looked in that tank and I found the source of the smell. That tank had probably 40 fish in it, including like venustus that were 10 inches long, like big bangers in this tank. And they were all dead. Every single one of them. I thought. The water was gray and all of the fish were up at the top, and they had started that whole turning white process. Like it was horrible. Little side note here, you may not know this about me, but I spent 5 years as a U.S. Capitol Police officer back in the early 2000s. And while I was up there, a very common story that the old timers that were up there would tell is way back in the day, this guy went on the west front of the Capitol, doused himself with gasoline and lit himself on fire. And when that happened, there was nothing really anybody could do. They just could basically stand there and watch it happen. It was apparently some kind of religious thing. I don't know. But every single person that told me about that story that was there said the exact same thing. The smell was something that I will never forget as long as I live. Well, I can relate. Okay, maybe the smell of a bunch of dead fish in a very small confined room is not as extreme as a human being burning alive, but you understand what I'm saying. It was the worst thing ever. And what made it even more unbearable is the fact that this was completely avoidable. See, it took me only about 5 minutes of investigating to realize exactly what this problem was. It was a filter failure. The filter that I had on that tank completely shut down, and it was easy to figure out why. But I do want to say this real quick. This is something that would have happened with any filter that's ever been made, any power filter that's ever been made. So because it's something that was not the filter's fault, it was the fish keeper's fault, I'm not going to be telling you what brand or model the filter was. All I'm going to say is it was a really big canister filter. This tank had a sand substrate in it with all these big banger African cichlids in there. African cichlids are known for moving their substrate around, and they moved the substrate over towards the intake of the filter. It got sucked up and it jammed the impeller in there. Again, this is something that could happen to any filter that's ever been made. So please don't be that guy in the comments. It's got to be this filter or that filter because I heard a story that one time. No, you heard a story about something that could have happened to any filter. I'm not in the business of disparaging brands or anything like that unless they're really deserving of it. But this is a scenario where the filter is not deserving of it at all because it wasn't the filter's fault. It was this guy's fault. And if it happens to your filter, it's probably your fault too. So let's just not talk about what filter brand or what type of model or whatever. Who cares? It can happen to any of them. Here's the worst thing about this story. This is something that happened on a Monday evening. Now, it happening on a Monday might not be a big deal to you, but in my world, it is. Why? Well, it's because I knew this is something that could have happened at any time within the last 2 days. Something I've always done for as long as I've kept particularly African cichlids is fast my fish on Sundays. I do this so that the fish will go around, pick up whatever uneaten food there is around the tank. And let's be honest, fish are not going to starve if you miss feeding them one day. It's just a practice that I've always been in. It helps to keep the tank a little cleaner, a little longer. Well, since I don't feed my fish on Sundays, that meant that this could have happened as early as Saturday, and it was just down there sitting. And it was something that if that tank was sitting next to my TV in my living room, or really anywhere on the main floor that I'm in all the time, I would have seen it, I would have reacted, and I wouldn't have lost any fish. But instead, I had this thing hidden in the back corner of my basement. There's really actually no, I take that back. There's 3 lessons to be learned from this video. First is, don't be dumb like me. Second is always, no matter what your circumstances are, no matter how busy you are or what you have going on, always check your aquariums. If you're somebody that takes a day off every week like I do, still go in there and just give it a quick buzz, quick look through and make sure everything's okay. Because if something crazy is happening, like a filter failure, you'll notice it and you might want the day off, but you still have to address that. And thankfully, you were there to see it. And the last thing is pay close attention to where you put your aquariums. Yeah, I know a dedicated fish room is everyone's dream, but I want you to ask yourself, am I going to feel the same way 6 months from now as I do now, when it's a chore to have to go to a dedicated area to take care of my tanks and all of that kind of stuff? If you are hesitant at all to answer that, your answer is probably that you should just keep your tanks exactly where they are, front and center, so you see them all the time. Now, I do want to end this video on a positive note. It's not all doom and gloom, because while I was scooping out that pile of dead fish, and one of the worst experiences of my life, because what do you do with all those dead fish? It wasn't pretty. But anyway, as I'm scooping all of them out, I did find one lone survivor in that tank. I don't know how he survived, but it was a male Tropheus du Bois. He made it through. He was a tough little fella, and we had him like another 2 or 3 years after that. That's not a happy ending to the story, but at least it's not a total loss. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this absolutely delightful trip down memory lane. My goal here is to share the mistakes that I made with you, in the hopes that you don't make those mistakes. So I hope I was able to get through to you. Keep an eye on your tanks. That's really the moral of the story here. I hope it helped out. If you want to support what we're doing, you can do that easily by becoming a channel member, and there's something big in it for you. We stream every other Friday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time for channel members only. We stream to the public every Friday from 8 p.m. to 9:30 Eastern. But at 9:30 every other week, we switch it over to channel members, and we bring you on the stream with us to show us your tanks and talk about what you're doing and all that. It really is a lot of fun. If you don't want to do that, I understand, but you're going to be ordering aquarium supplies, right? Don't order them from that big company that has warehouses all over the place and has the fancy vans driving around and people peeing in bottles and throwing them in the ditch. Don't order them from them. You're going to order them anyway. Order them from us, keepfishkeeping.com. We sell everything you need for your aquarium. We'll ship everything right out to you. And as of right now, it's just Lisa and I. So it's actually us that's packing up those orders and shipping them out to you. I don't know if you think that's cool, but if you do, keepfishkeeping.com. Join in on the coolness. Anyway, bye.